I apologize for the late participation. I'm going to talk about climate change. In the last 2 years, the two academies, Pontifical Academy of Sciences and Social Sciences, thanks to our Chancellor's leadership, organized a series of remarkable meetings, at least 6 of them. From there, an idea was distilled, which is that an alliance or coalition between science, policy, and religion can have a transformational effect in our fight against climate change. I go back to the meeting, first of these, in 2014, May, Professor Dasgupta of the Social Sciences, and Chancellor Marcello, and myself, we organized a meeting on sustainability. And I think about a third of the members here were there. It was remarkable for a meeting of physicists and chemists and biologists. I was expecting some great scientific solution to the climate change problem. Instead, we said a coalition between science, policy, and religion can have a transformational effect. Then Partha and I wrote this editorial in Science magazine. So what I want to do is walk you through that. And I would certainly welcome challenges to this idea. Let me start with the science. So I basically think of slowing down climate change as bending the curve. From 1800 to 2010, we have already emitted 2 trillion tons of carbon dioxide to the air, okay? About 45% is still up there, which is about 900 billion tons. Just imagine the sheer weight of it. That's equal to about 400 billion cars circling the planet every moment. And our best understanding is each trillion ton would commit the planet to about 0.7 degrees Celsius warming, with a 90% uncertainty range of about 0.3 to about 1.5. At our current rate, by 2033, I rounded it off, we would have put the 3rd trillion ton. That would have already committed the planet to about 2 degree warming. When will it show up? My own estimate is by mid-century, 2050. But the good news is there is still time to limit the warming, okay? And they can raise many questions. How can you make a prediction of this complex climate system? I can address that in the discussion session, but let me just tell you, I'm showing a prediction I made in 1980, 36 years ago, that we would detect the warming by year 2000. That was when IPCC declared. But like this, there has been at least 6 published predictions, all made before 1990, all came true. The only exception is the observed changes were much larger than what we predicted, okay? So let me start with now a good news, why I'm saying there's still time. This is an area I had personal involvement. Until 1975, we thought carbon dioxide was the only greenhouse gas. I stumbled on this discovery in 75, chlorofluorocarbons, because of the huge dipole moment. The Martin wave is very asymmetric. Its greenhouse effect was so large, a ton of these CFCs had the same effect as 15,000 tons of carbon dioxide. Truly super greenhouse effect. This was a year after Maria Molina's paper showing the same CFCs were impacting the ozone layer. That was on the chemistry, this is on the physics. And now a host of other greenhouse gases added, but half of the warming is coming from this non-CO2. There is an opportunity there I want to touch on. However, the Montreal Protocol did not recognize the greenhouse effect of this halocarbon, so they replaced the CFC with another halocarbon, which had little effect on the ozone layer, but it was still 1,000 to 4,000 times more potent than CFCs. So we argued, and it's the paper for my graduate student, we said if we phase out HFCs, because there are technologies, we don't have to use these refrigerants, we would almost mitigate 0.5 degree of the warming. And this was later, Mario and I and several others teamed up, wrote a lot of policy-related papers. And I wanted to tell you, just a month ago, 200 nations, including US, amended the Montreal Protocol to phase out HFCs. This is one of the most spectacular climate mitigation law, which nobody can undo. But because US was consumed with the elections, it just went unnoticed. And so at Marrakesh, which was about a week and a half ago, I'm honored that I participated as a representative of the Holy See. Maria Molina, Dorwood Zolke, an environment lawyer, and I released a report. What kind of implementation we can do we still have a chance to keep the warming under 2? So we came with these building blocks. So the first building block, of course, is the Paris Agreement. And mind you, it cannot be overturned even by Mr. Trump for at least 3 years. It's going to continue. Okay, after 3 years, of course, US can withdraw. Then what's ignored is the series of sister agreements have been signed. One is, I told you, the HFCs. The second was aircraft emissions. There's now a major agreement to cut down emissions from aircraft, ships. I want to mention the last item there, the subnational. California alone, thanks to our Governor Jerry Brown, has an MOU with 160 jurisdictions covering China, India, EU, or most nations, that they will work together and collaborate to keep the warming under 2. So there are many things. So we put that as 2 building blocks. What we were proposing is that we have 2 levers to pull. That's the third one. Carbon, decarbonize the economy, and the second is the short-lived climate pollutants. Okay? There are 4 of them, methane, black carbon, HFCs I talked about. We need both. This is unfortunately lost on many who still think they solve the energy problem, they'll solve the climate problem. CO2 right now is only 50%, okay? So how do we do this? So I'm just showing it metaphorically. Pulling the CO2 lever, because of its lifetime of century to 1,000 years, even if we manage to decarbonize the economy by 2040, we won't see its effect on the climate system for another 40 years. It's very slow moving. So, but the climate and the warming itself is speeding up. So we said we start pulling the short-lived climate pollutants. To tell you how immediately the system would respond, the soot, which is the stuff which comes out of your diesel truck, black carbon, its lifetime is a week. So if everyone in the world puts diesel particulate filters for heavy-duty vehicles and cars, which is available off the shelf, that effect is gone in 10 days. That is how rapidly we can slow down the climate change. So this sort of shows the graph. I don't want you to struggle with this. Basically, cutting down these SLCPs will cut the warming by 50% within the next 30 years. And if you reduce the CO2 at the same time, the CO2 effect would kick in by 2050, and you see the bottom curve, we can still have a chance to keep the planet under 2 degrees, okay? Talk about decarbonization. Now there's a lot of gloom and doom because of the elections. What's not known to many, this is the paper we just sent for publication. 53 cities around the world are already on a decarbonization path. Their climate action plan calls for 80% reduction in CO2 by 2050. We have put it as countries, EU and US, and there are 2 cities from Texas, I was surprised, in a carbon neutrality plan. On the right-hand side is 63 global industries. So this is already, the train has left, okay? And our best hope is these will show economically it's feasible to cut down the carbon pollution. In fact, California and Sweden has shown that cutting down the CO2 emissions, going to renewables, did not destroy their economy. If anything, their GDP grew by 10 to 30%. So they've blown this argument, going in a carbon neutral pathway is going to mess up the economy. So I want to go to the top one. Let's say because of the US elections and we don't know what's going to happen to other regions like France and Germany, if there is a 10-year delay, we don't pull that carbon lever by 2020. Instead, we pull it 2030. We have to take out 1 trillion tons of CO2 out of the air. So that's our top one. Atmospheric carbon extraction. There are many working on this. There is still no scalable technology. The cost of that is estimated to be $100 a ton. In other words, to take out 1 trillion tons, we have to spend $100 trillion. There's the question of the early detection in cancer. If we do that now, we avoid all this cost in the end. So this is what we have presented, and we're going to take it up to the UNFCCC. So let me come to where the religion can play a role. So you ask, the science obviously can't tell you what to do. You can just tell a person, if you jump off a 10-foot floor, you're going to die, but it's not going to be able to, science can't tell that person not to jump, right? So the question is, why are we not doing this? There is just no public support. We know that in the US and any place. Very few have still got the urgency of the problem. And very few have got the understanding that we got to pull that lever from 2020. The Paris Agreement allows the emissions to go to 2030, which we find means you would have put another 1 trillion tons. So we feel if that public support, if we can discuss climate change in an apolitical atmosphere, and we think the churches, the mosques, the synagogues, and the temples would give that apolitical forum. And like I said, Marcelo organized a series of meetings to test this idea. Sorry. So let me go. What is the rationale we'll give for going to religion? At least my rationale is that it's become a huge moral, ethical issue. The first is 50% of the pollution comes from the wealthiest 1 billion. There are poorest 3 billion. They've not even discovered fossil fuels. They're still burning firewood and dung to cook, okay? And we know who's going to suffer the worst consequences of climate change. And the second issue, of course, the intergenerational. The effects that we let loose is going to last thousands of years. So our children, grandchildren, so there are a number of moral, ethical issues which we as scientists can't discuss, but religious leaders can. So yeah, this is one of the meetings where the two academies got together, invited over 80 mayors, and we brought in a governor of California, and all the cities were represented, and there was unanimous agreement that we have to bring down this warming. And so I think the cities, remember 75% of the people are going to live in cities, so there is a new avenue which was opened. And I want to tell you, beyond moralizing, what is amazing about this Laudato Si, it had a fantastic scientific idea, the issue of integral ecology, okay? And I sort of put this in the diagram, that's the way I think. So it says the technology has to be involved in a circular model with the economy and wealth, and it defines economy as work for all. That made me think, I've been talking about decarbonizing the economy within 20 years. I never thought about what would happen to the millions of people working on fossil fuel industry. Did anyone talk about that? How do we relocate them? Laudato Si talks about that, okay? And then it says wealth, you count wealth not just by GDP, natural wealth, this is something Dasgupta has been talking about, and then the Laudato Si are social capital, right? All our institutions and GDP. Imagine we evolved to a society in which we develop technology this way. So it's interesting, this idea has caught on very much in Nature. Science magazine invited us for the second time. This was written this year, and where Marcelo and I concluded the real innovation is this new synergy between science, policy, and religion. So what my proposal, I floated it at Marrakesh. The Laudato Si says, cry of the earth to be heard with the cry of the poor, right? So I'm saying then, to the extent that the poorest 3 billion had very little to do with climate change, why not we provide them clean energy access so they can cope with the climate change we have let loose on the planet? And the cost of that comes to about $80 per capita per year, if the top 1 billion would pay for it. And the second is intergenerational equity. So the cry of the earth to be heard with the cry of our children and grandchildren. So that, of course, we have to decarbonize the economy. That's why I'm excited to attend the session on Monday to see how our energy experts say what kind of scalable technologies we have, how fast can we decarbonize. I must tell you, as a climate scientist, you've got to start decarbonizing, starting from 2020, not go to zero emission. By 2035, in 15 years, you cut down the emission by 40%. That's not an impossibility. California has already said they're going to be on that path. And these 50 cities are on that path, which tells me the technologies are there to take us to 40%. We need energy geniuses to take us to 0%, okay? So we have 20-year time to do that. So the cost of it, surprisingly, is just $450. So it's a $450 problem we are arguing about. And I can tell you how I came with the cost. But I want to tell you, how do we provide this clean energy access? How are we going to send this $80 to a village woman? So this was a paper which just came in Nature 2 weeks ago. So the stove, which cuts down her emission to near zero, remember, 4 million women, children, and men die inhaling this wood smoke, okay? So this stove, but the problem was the stove was $80. So we said, why can't we tie her with the fact that she's being a climate warrior, showing us how to mitigate climate change? So we converted that into carbon credits. So my daughter, it became a family affair. Two of my daughters are the senior authors. So she designed a simple sensor. So converted the stove into a smart stove. And for every home, they've done it from 5,000 homes. It sends the data to my lab. I give her a conversion to convert our hours of usage. And so far it's working extremely well. So typically how this would work is the woman there on the top gets a loan from a bank, or it could be just her boss, okay? And then she comes to Surya, we convert her stove into a smart stove. And here we have created our own climate fund, it's like game theory we are doing. But how does she get paid? She doesn't know how to go to a bank. She doesn't know how to read bank books. So we pay the money through cell phone, okay? And so we feel there should be other ways. So any climate mitigation, particularly if we follow Laudato Si, we have to think about how are we going to protect the poor while protecting the planet. Thank you.